Hello, I'm Kirsty Young, and this is a podcast from the Desert Island Discs archive. For rights reasons, we've had to shorten the music. The programme was originally broadcast in 2006, and the presenter was Sue Lawley.
My castaway this week is a poet, performer and writer. He's created more than 100 books, mostly for children, including anthologies, picture books, stories and poems. He's a natural communicator, always informal but above all truthful. His stories are real. In his last year at Oxford, he had a play produced at the Royal Court, and then he joined the BBC as a general trainee. But he was sacked after 3 years, only learning later that his parents' communist background had been one of the reasons behind his dismissal. One of his children, Eddie, died suddenly at the age of 18, an event that changed his life and has informed his work ever since. You have to be utterly ruthless with your feelings, he says. You can't tell fibs. He is Michael Rosen. Michael, your honesty in some of the moments that you describe is very painful. Why wouldn't it work if you made it up? Why can't you tell fibs?
You can't tell fibs because it won't. The poem won't work. If you tell a fib about what you're feeling, the next time you read it, you'll be embarrassed by it. You'll feel awkward about it, and it won't do the brain work for you. Because when you write about something honestly, when you look at it on the page, it can talk back at you, and you can look at yourself almost as if you're another person.
You've written, of course, very honestly about the death of Eddie, your 18-year-old. I mean, I wince to quote it, but it is what we're talking about. You write when you got your son's body back after the post-mortem, you write, "I put my hand on his chest and it rustled. Under his shirt they dressed him in a bin bag. They must have cut him about to find out what happened." It's very convincing, and you certainly wouldn't fabricate that for effect, would you?
No, there was a polythene bag under his shirt, I think. I think I wanted there to connect with the fact that bodies are real. I liked the material thing, that there was his body and we could stroke him and we could see that his hair went on growing after he died. And my brother actually took photographs of it, and they're appalling but in some way or another reassuring, because he did die, and that's the real thing about his death. So that was, I think, why I wrote that.
I understand that, but it is intensely personal, that's all. And you share all of these things, not just about Eddie, but all sorts of things about you. I mean, there are whole swathes of strangers out there who know everything about you. It's a strange thing you have to give. You have to give an awful lot of yourself if you're your kind of poet, don't you?
Yes, somewhere or another I've become a kind of confessional poet, but I can draw things out of my head of things that have happened to me.
Well, you tapped into a rich seam, which is your life, which is quite colourful, as we shall hear. Give us just a quick poem to give us the feel of your family before we go into your first record, and then we can plunder it after that.
This comes from my first book, which was Mind Your Own Business, and it goes like this. Father says, "Never let me see you doing that again." Father says, "Tell you once, tell you 1,000 times, come hell or high water, his finger drills my shoulder. Never let me see you doing that again." My brother knows all his phrases off by heart, so we practice them in bed at night.
It's great stuff.
And that's the way it was, you know. My brother was brilliant at imitating my dad. Well, my dad, if he wanted you to be quiet, OK, he didn't say shush or shut up or be quiet. He just used to go like this. "The noise." Just like that. So my brother used to walk around going, "The noise," every time I made a racket, you see, and it would sort of disarm my dad just as his hand was going up to his forehead to go, "The noise," like that. Yes.
Great stuff. More to come. Let's have your first record. What is it?
It's, Oh, What a Lovely War. And really it's to remember the wonderful times my parents used to take me. Well, we used to schlep right the way across London from the suburbs where we were brought up, in Pinner, all the way down to Stratford East in East London. So in my teenage years, there I was going to see Oh, What a Lovely War. And it would be good to have a little bit of irony, I thought, on the island. It wasn't a lovely war, was it? As we know only too well. So, Oh, What a Lovely War.
Oh, 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 it's a lovely war.
title track from the 1963 original cast recording of Oh, What a Lovely War. Do you think poetry, Michael, was always destined to be your medium? Was it always going on in the house in Pinner?
Yes, my mum in particular, I can see her sort of sitting on the sofa dreamily thinking about W.B. Yeats. And yes, we used to have records as well. We used to have records of Dylan Thomas doing...
Under Milkwood, I
Well, there was Under Milkwood, and there was also Richard Burton reading Fern Hill. And my brother, as all part of the takeoffs of my dad and so on, he would do takeoffs of these things. So, there's a little bit... He goes, and it was all shining, like that.
Your brother was obviously quite a character.
Oh, absolutely. We shared a bedroom, you see, so he would I don't think he used it as his stage, really. I mean, he was sort of on one side of the room acting out the Molesworth books, and my dad, never let me see you doing that again. And also, in the old days when it was the third programme, they would have these recordings of poets reading their own poems, and my parents would say, I think the boys would like this. Yeah, right. You would hear the announcer say, and now we have a very rare recording of the poet W.B. Yeats, William Butler Yeats, reading his poem Lake Isle is Free. Before we play you this recording, we would like to point out the rather extraordinary incantatory style of delivery of the poet W.B. Yeats, and also we would apologise for the poor quality of the recording as it was recorded on wax cylinders. And then you hear, and this faraway voice going, I will arise, go to his... Well, you see, my parents would be sitting there nodding, listening to this really seriously. But, of course, my brother said, why don't we get it up as an act, you see? And one of us would do the... and the other would do, I will arise! And we'd do this act at the kind of least appropriate moments, like breakfast or something like that. And then, of course, my dad could go, the noise. There we are.
So, he would disapprove. Because he apparently, he was a teacher. They were both teachers, weren't
yes,
they?
That's right. My dad's secondary, my mum primary.
Yeah, but your brother was obviously a kind of third parent, wasn't he?
Oh, yes. 4 years older than me. And he was like a teacher as well, my brother, He thought, I don't know quite why he took on this job, but he thought that everything he learnt at school he had to teach me. So can you imagine, I'm at primary school and he's teaching me algebra. I don't understand it, but anyway.
Record number 2.
Record number 2 will have Ewan MacColl singing Fourpence a Day, and it's from an album called Shuttle and Cage. Ewan MacColl was quite a presence in our house. I think people forget about Ewan MacColl. They remember that he wrote First Time I Saw Your Face, or maybe Dirty Old Town, but he was a great discoverer. He was a great archaeologist and discovered this whole body of song and poetry that was made up in the 19th and early 20th century that we don't really have a word for it, but you could call it industrial song, the songs and ballads that working people made up through the time of the Industrial Revolution and beyond. Fourpence a day.
And the little slaves come to the door to knock, knock, knock. Come, me little washer lad, come, let's away. It's very hard to walk for fourpence a day. Me daddy was a miner and lived down in the town. 'Twas hard work and poverty that allus kept him down. He aimed for me to go to school, but Brassy couldn't pay. So I had to go to the washing rig for fourpence a day.
That was Ewan MacColl and Fourpence a Day. Your dad as well was obviously a bit of a performer. It's obviously where Mise and Bryes get it from. But for a long time you didn't know you were a performer, I understand. You went to a school, didn't you, and read out a poem and they taught you how to read your own poetry.
Yes, I'd produced Mind Your Own Business, and I arrived at this school, Princess Frederica, an inner-city primary school in Kensal Rise in West London. And I'd been invited there by a wonderful deputy head, an Irish guy called Sean. He put me in front of, it must have been 300 or 400 kids, 300 or 400 primary school kids, and said, and now, boys and girls, this is really wonderful. We've got the man who writes all those lovely poems, Michael Rosen. And I stood in front of these kids, and I was just horrified. And this was about the first time I'd sort of been anywhere near an audience that size and like that. And so I held the book in front of my face, and I went, a ship in the dock is at the end of the trip. The man on board is the captain of the ship. The name of the man is Old Ben Brown. He played the ukulele with his trousers down. And I saw the look of horror on his face. And so he just suddenly turned to the kids and he went, it doesn't go like that, does it, boys and girls? And there was this huge roar. No, Mr. Macaulay, no. And he said, how does it go? And the whole school went, the ship in the docks at the end of the trip. The man on board is the captain of the ship. The name of the man was Old Ben Brown, and he played the ukulele with his trousers down, And he was dancing about doing this. And my jaw just dropped, and I was looking. I had no idea that you could do that with this stuff I'd written. I don't know why I'd never made the match.
And did it alter the way you wrote stuff after that?
Yes.
I mean, did you wrote in squeaks and burps for yourself to do?
Yes, and sounds, and it had never occurred to me that you could make it into a whole acty piece.
Record number 3.
Well, we'll have Big Bill Broonzy singing Black, Brown and White. So there we are in the suburbs. My brother and I, we're listening to this wonderful blues guitarist and singer, Big Bill Broonzy, and this song about discrimination before Martin Luther King. The song comes from 1951. We were listening to it in the 50s. Here it is, Black, Brown and White.
I went to an employment office. I got a number and I got in line. They called everybody's number, but they never did call mine. They said, if you was white, you was all right. But if you was brown, you could stick around. But as you was black, brother, get back, get back, get back.
Big Bill Broonzy and Black, Brown and White. So then you toyed with becoming a doctor, Michael Rosen, started instruction in dissection. Let me quote you. 6 of us used our scalpels to find out what an old woman was made of, you write. It didn't last long, did it?
No, I spent a year at Middlesex Hospital Medical School, and I thought, I don't really want to be doing this. How can I get out? And my brother was at Oxford, at Wadham College, and my brother had told me how people did switch courses around at Oxford, and so I applied and I got in.
But you swapped to English for some...
I did.
some way you managed to do this.
I did, that's right. So the problem was you have to go and see somebody, don't you? But... the boss of Wadham College at the time was an extraordinary bloke called Sir Maurice Bowrer. Had a very strange way of talking. It kind of went up and down, and sort of Stephen Fry times 3, you know. And
the legendary figure.
Yes.
Great scholar, great wit, of course.
Absolutely. And so, we went in, I sat down, and he went, It's a very kind of peremptory way of behaving. I said, I'd like to change course. From what to what? I'd say, from medicine to English. Can you write a sentence? And I said, yes. And then he turned to my father and said, what do you think of this? And my dad said, well, and he prepared this huge speech, a la London University. And he said, well, I think mostly that it's quite good. Good, convince your father, convince anyone. Haven't got any money, £50, will that do? Bye. And it was out. The whole thing took about 30 seconds.
Brilliant. But you were in, and it was a fit. I mean, you should have been doing English, that was right, wasn't it? You ended up in your 3rd year having this play put on at the Royal Court. It's amazing, your name up in lights, huh?
Yes, it was, yes. I'd written a play called Backbone.
About?
Sort of about the marriage between my brother and who was to be his wife. But it was also based on a relationship that I was going through. I kind of mixed it all up.
So you were plundering your own life from the beginning?
Yes, shamelessly plundering.
Your life becomes your art.
Yes.
But it was your mother in the end who got you published, wasn't it?
Yeah, she'd become a broadcaster. My mum in the late 60s, early 70s was working in schools radio with a wonderful producer called Joan Griffiths, and she would be, when I come home from university, she would be sitting there with a pile of poems on a desk and going, I can't find a way to get from scissors to toenails. I just need some sort of link. She had a poem about scissors and a poem about toenails, something like that. And so I would dash upstairs and write a poem about scissors cutting toenails, you see, and I'd come down and go, would that be any use to you, Mum? And after some trying, she put one of these poems in one of her broadcasts, you see, shameless nepotism. There it was. And the producer, Joan Griffiths, she said, has this Michael of yours, has he written any others? So really it did come via my mum, yes.
And that ended up being your first book in the
Well, those
70s.
poems collected together went into the first book, Mind Your Own Business.
And somebody married you with Quentin Blake, which must have helped.
It was wonderful, yes. That was at Andre Deutsch, the publishers, yes.
And you've been together on and off ever since.
Yes.
Record number 4.
Record number 4, well, I think I'll need to remember the 60s on this island, won't I? Well, I don't know, it felt that the shackles were falling off. All that sort of drabness that I remember from Pinner and those front rooms without the lights on. Suddenly the lights did come on in our lives. And to remember that, I think the best person to remember it with would be Aretha Franklin and my favourite track, Spanish Harlem.
With eyes as black as coal,
Aretha Franklin and Spanish Harlem. So you got in, Michael, on the highly prized BBC graduate trainee scheme, and then 3 years later, after having done the rounds a bit, you were out, on your neck, in the street, Portland Place. What happened? Did they tell you it was because of your parents' links with the Communist Party?
Oh, no, not at all, not at all. No, I thought maybe I hadn't been very good at getting up in the morning when we were filming something called Sam on Boff's Island for Schools TV. I thought maybe that's why, or something like that. And then I was invited in to see HST, Head of Staff Training, Owen Reed, and he invited me in and he said, "We've been very, very glad to have you on board, Mike, but we think it would be better if you went freelance." And I thought, brilliant, I did that thing, in Yiddish it's called kvelling, swelling with pride. I kvelled, I thought, I am going to be a freelancer. And it took me the time it takes to get from the Langham to Oxford Circus tube station, which is about 200 yards, to realise that I had actually been fired. I think it took me that long to realise.
But you didn't know why?
No idea. Until I think 12, 13 years later, I got a knock on the door from what they call an investigative journalist. And he knocked on the door and said, "Have you any idea why you were sacked?" And I said, "Well, I think it was because I couldn't get up in the morning." And he said, "No, you never thought it was because of your politics?" And I said, no, I don't go in for that conspiratorial stuff. I don't buy that. And then the following Sunday, out came the great story that the BBC had these little Christmas trees on people's files if they were suspect, and that there was an officer from MI5 sitting in room 104. His name was Brigadier Ronnie Stoneham.
And he put the finger on you?
Well, it seems like it, yes. In fact, I wrote about it. I read the poem about it at a meeting on one occasion, at a poetry reading, and a guy came up to me afterwards and said, "You didn't mention the Christmas trees, old chap." And I said, no. And he said, "By the way, it's not Stoneham, it's Stoneham. He was my boss."
Good heavens. Good heavens. It all comes back around, doesn't it?
It does, if you write about these things, yes.
Number 5.
Well, number 5, this is John Doherty, and he's a fiddler from Donegal. He must have been born in the 1890s, and what I love about Irish fiddling, when it comes from that tradition, is that really this is it's like a testimony to the unnoticed. There's a thing we do about what we call roots music or folk music or whatever, is that we forget the just incredible skill that these guys have. And so I think I'll think about that when I listen to Miss Ramsey on my desert island.
John Doherty and Miss Ramsey. You have quite a few children, Michael, some of your own and some inherited, 3 different relationships along the way. But it's Eddie, your second-born, that we know most of through the poems anyway. It's Eddie as a baby misbehaving at the supermarket, or as a toddler taking the handbrake off the car and rolling down the hill at the picnic. And it's Eddie who died 7 years ago when he was 18. How did it happen?
He was working as a crewman in the theatre and would be very tired during the day. And I came back from doing a performance in Bristol. I came home and he was lying on the sofa and saying he felt a bit fluey. So I gave him paracetamol and a drink. And so we spent the evening together, and I was watching telly, and I think I went off and wrote an article and came back, and he said he was very groggy and he would get up every now and then and have a drink and sit down again. In the end, he took himself off to bed. The very last thing that night, I went up and I mopped his forehead and I mopped his hands because he did feel very hot. I thought, it's funny, the paracetamol doesn't seem to be working. I popped another couple of paracetamol into his mouth and gave him some water. I had to get up in the morning quite early, and then I went in at about 6, and he was dead. He was lying in the bed, I could feel immediately he was cold and stiff, and I rang 999, and the ambulance guys told me to pull him out of the bed onto the floor, and I can remember pulling him out to the bed, and he was completely stiff, and they came over within 5-10 minutes, quickly put their fingers on his neck to feel the pulse, said, he's dead, like that, and that was it.
And inevitably, as the parent and as the one person who was there, you kind of blame yourself that you didn't spot that there was something worse than flu going on, I suppose.
Absolutely. I didn't know. Now, I thought I knew the symptoms for meningitis.
So you looked for those?
Yes, I did. And at that time, I didn't know that meningitis can take another route. And it was the septicemia kind, which is the kind that poisons your blood.
So even a doctor mightn't have spotted the symptoms?
And sadly, on occasions, they don't.
Yeah.
You will see cases like this come where the doctors, either the GP or the hospital, they miss it too.
Yeah. But
it's a devil.
You couldn't write about it for a long time, could you? But you did after a couple of years. I suppose it's therapeutic, is it, to get it all out, give it a shape, put it on the page, have
That's
a look
right.
at it?
As I say to children, I kind of talk through my pen. That's what I do. So I started talking through my pen about what had happened, about what I thought about Eddie, and also, in a way, sort of taking my own pulse. How did I feel about this today and yesterday and tomorrow and so on? So.
Do you want to read us one? I wonder if you want to... I know you believe in commemorating. People deal with death in so many different ways, don't they? But I know that you're a commemorator. This is one from your book, Carrying the Elephant, which is the elephant of grief, really.
Barbara, whose husband died in a car smash, told me I'd have dreams. They'll be beautiful dreams, she said. None came for a year. Then they started coming. He visits. He stands in his grey check overshirt. He knows he's died. Once he said he was sorry that he didn't tell me it was septicemia. I said I was sorry that I didn't know it was septicemia. Sometimes he's at a distance, in the way he was when I would drop him off in Drury Lane in time for the matinee. Sometimes he's been close on the sofa, doing his crazy hugs or lifting me off the ground with all his massive, indestructible might.
Thank you. Record number 6.
One whole side of my life is wrapped up in France. It's always very difficult to describe this because you always sound a bit kind of poncy, don't you, as a sort of English person saying, oh, I love France, I do so love red wine and all the rest of it. But when I was 16, my dad said, why don't you go and stay with a colonie de vacances, which is really a youth camp. I'm 16. The old man sends me off to the Ardèche.
Good for your French.
Exactly. Boy. Good for your French boy. You're going to do French in the sixth form, that sort of thing. So I'm going to go off to the Ardèche, which is like cowboy country, you know. And they would play over and over again somebody called Léo Ferré, who I'd never heard of before. And here he is singing about Paris, but you don't call it Paris, you call it Paname, which is, as we might call London, the smoke. So here it is. It's a tribute to Paris. Paname.
Paname, y a des noms de rues que l'on oublie. C'est dans ces rues qu'après minuit, tu me faisais voir ton petit Paris. Paname, quand tu chialais dans tes klaxons, perdu là-bas parmi les hommes, tu venais vers moi comme une vraie môme.
Léo Ferré and Paname. Your publisher calls what you write, Michael Rosen, I think he calls them prose poems, and certainly some of your later ones are certainly freer verse than some of your early free verse, which was quite free. What do you call them? What is it? What is the form that you use, would you say? Is it not poetry is really what I'm getting at? And you know that there are critics who say that.
Yes, it's a bit of a problem because when I first started, you see, I thought I was writing like some other people. I thought I was writing a bit like D.H. Lawrence, a bit like an American poet called Carl Sandburg. And I thought that's the way I was writing. There was a tradition of it. If I had looked a bit further, of course, if you think of the Psalms, we never think of these as free verse, do we? But if you think about it, once upon a time that was Hebrew poetry, and then the things that we know, the Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. It doesn't rhyme, there's no rhythm to it, and then that's free verse from 1611.
Quite difficult to read, though. Yours is quite easy to read. It's quite interesting, isn't it? It's whether it rolls. It's whether, I mean, presumably you're reading out loud all of the time you're writing it, because you need to. It needs to be deliverable, doesn't it?
In my case, it's written with a spoken voice.
Yes.
Yes, it doesn't have to be, but in my case.
Do you despise those people who want to pigeonhole people such as you, and people who say, well, I suppose they're sort of self-appointed guardians, aren't they, of what is poetry and what is not poetry?
I can understand why they want to do it, because they feel there must be something special, that poetry is elevated language. That's what people want to say. I can understand that they want to say that, but I like the idea of a popular poetry that's built up out of the things you catch in the air. And I don't want to embellish them, I don't want to make them into rhyme, find a rhyme for over, Dover, Rover. No, you see,
but are they more than jokes?
Sometimes they're jokes, and sometimes they're ironic looks, and sometimes they are just as I see them, as paragraphs, little scenes, fragments from a life.
Number 7.
I think on the island I'll want to remember all the wonderful times I've had in and around schools, but in particular in London schools. And London is such a funny, odd, quirky, diverse place, and you go into schools and kids are cheeky to you, and you might be cheeky back at them, and you see them banging out rhythms on the desk and coming back at you for what you've written. And to sum all that up, I'd like to hear Smiley Culture doing Cockney translation.
Strictly double B, them run protection racket and control of CID. Say Cockney fire shoot, we bust man. Say Cockney say tea leaf, we just a sticks man. You know them have wedge while we have corn. Say Cockney say big first my son, we just say guan. Say Cockney say grass, we say old farmer man. When them talk about iron, them really mean bottom man. Rupkin and Chopperita, me say Cockney call Tom. Say Cockney say outbuilt, we say dirty Babylon. In the Cockney translation.
Smiley Culture and Cockney translation. So you've had 3 families, Michael. The oldest is Joe, who's now 30, I think. How old are the youngest, the third family?
We've got 2 there. We've got Elsie and Emile, and Elsie is 5 and Emile is 18 months.
Sweet. So are you a different father each time, do you feel? How have you changed as a father?
I'm not very good in the middle of the night. My wife said that the other night, when he was shouting because he was teething, I'm ashamed to say this, I turned over, I rolled away and put my hands over my ears. That's appalling, isn't it?
But what's interesting is that you had this rich childhood, as we've heard, and such a solid and secure one, and by definition, of course, you haven't created that kind of let's hold together, come what may, feeling in the families that you've had. Do you regret that, I wonder, that you weren't able to recreate what your mother and father gave you?
Yes, there are moments I kind of think it was the continuity of it. And it's still going on. My dad's still alive. I mean, my mum died in the 70s, but it's that kind of permanent reference point that you can come back to again and again. You know, I mean, it was my dad's birthday the other week. I'm sitting there with my brother, and of course halfway through he kind of goes, "The noise," or something like that. My dad had this way of saying things about you. Like I remember he always used to say, "You come into the country for a bit of peace and quiet, and all you can hear is Mad Michael shouting his bloody head off." Well, that phrase, that sentence, has kind of carried on. You know, it's still being said. Now, I suppose what I miss that. I miss the fact that somehow or other I don't have these kind of shared reference points that we can all sit round and say those things in quite that way. Everybody's kind of gone off in different directions.
Last record.
Last record introduced to me by my wife. And I knew of Taj Mahal, it's not his real name, blues artist. I'd even seen him perform in the 60s. And he did that thing that some of the African-American blues artists did, or blues musicians. They met up with Africans, like Dizzy Gillespie meeting up with Hugh Masekela. And this is Taj Mahal meeting up with Tumani Diabete, and an album called Tunkaranke.
Kamalemba labidu kelebidu eto biko
Taj Mahal and Tumani Diabete and Tunkaranke. If you could only take one of those 8 records, Michael, which one would you choose?
I think I'll take Big Bill Broonzy. And that'll remind me of Bry's and me. Brian took up the guitar at one point, and every now and then I would grab a harmonica, which I'd taken up, little blues harmonica, and I'd say, Bry's, time for a blues up. And then my brother would play the guitar, and I would play this appalling harmonica over it, and believe it or not, even try and sing like that. I'm squirming with embarrassment now. So this would be great. I'll remember those lovely times of sitting with my brother and playing Black, Brown and White.
And what about a book? You get the Bible and Shakespeare, as you know.
Yeah, that'll be good. I shall try and learn whole swathes of Shakespeare. I think I'll take the complete poems of Carl Sandburg, a writer of free verse and prose poems and paragraphs and stuff. So, yes, that's what I'll take.
And a luxury.
I think I'll take Eddie's Didgeridoo. In the last months of his life, Eddie would sit in the corner trying to play a didgeridoo. So I could sit there for hours going thingy.
Michael Rosen, thank you very much indeed for letting us hear your Desert Island Discs.
Thank you, Sue.
You've been listening to a podcast from the Desert Island Discs archive. For more podcasts, please visit bbc.co.uk/Radio 4.